Welcome everyone to this month's Teaser Behavioral Talk. For those of you that do not know me, I am Thanos Vostanis. I'm one of the lecturers here at the Teaser Center, where we offer both ABAI and UKSBA accredited master's courses in applied behavior analysis and positive behavior support. So our graduate students can become either board certified behavior analysts or, as we call it now in England, UKBA certs. For those of you that do not know the Teaser Center, we specialize in individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Along with our ABA and PBS master's courses, we also have courses in autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have a peer-reviewed journal called the Teaser Learning Disability Review, and I am always keen to encourage you to consider submitting your good clinical work with us. Someone says that they cannot hear me. Can I just get some feedback in the chat whether the rest of you can hear me, just to know, to figure out if it's a problem on my end? People can hear me? Okay, you can hear me, good, okay. Cool. So those of you that cannot hear me, perhaps try to rejoin the session and check your settings. So as I was saying, we have the Teaser Learning Disability Review, where we are very keen to welcome submissions around supporting individuals with learning disabilities, which is the term we use here in England to refer to intellectual disabilities. So please consider that, and I will add some links in the chat, so monitor those. Now, in terms of housekeeping rules, I will deliver 3 keywords for those of you claiming a CEU or a CPD. Make a note of those keywords and wait for me. At the end of the session, I will post the link in the chat for you to access, and then you can add all your information, the 3 keywords, and I will email you the certificate within the next month or 40 days. I try to do them earlier, but that's my deadline, really. Folks, do not email me. I know some of you have been attending for years and you're used to the old method. Please do not email me the keywords. Make sure you access the chat and follow the link. Today, we welcome Dr. Story, Keith Story, who is going to be discussing positive behavior support and how it's applied to adults with disabilities. And Keith, thank you very, very much for agreeing to present to our audience. We have people from all over the globe. Can I get some people in the chat just to indicate where they're from? I'm getting in the habit of asking you guys to do that because it's always nice and encouraging to see the varied attendance. So make sure you hear the 3 keywords. Make sure you check our website. Make sure you check Teaser Learning Disability Review. And Keith, as I said, thank you for joining us today. Could I ask you to tell us about what you're currently involved in terms of your work, and then please take it away. And we're very keen to hear what you have to say about PBS.
Okay, great. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about positive behavior supports for adults with disabilities. I started my career 46 years ago working with adults with learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities. And throughout my career, I've been involved with adults with disabilities around positive behavior supports, as well as employment issues. And I think often the two tie together. So the last part of my career, I left the university and retired, and then went back to work doing clinical work, ABA, in-home, and school services. And through that, I worked with adults with intellectual disabilities in their home setting as well as community settings. So this is a topic that I really enjoy working on professionally, and I want to share some ideas with you. So in this presentation, I want to look broadly at supports for adults with disabilities. And I'm talking about adults with all types of disabilities, though I know a lot of us work more on adults with learning disabilities, but I think what we're talking about here applies across the board. But I think from an ABA perspective, we kind of get locked into a narrow focus on what appropriate supports are. And I want to challenge you to look broadly at how you think about supporting people with disabilities. So, and as I go through this presentation, feel free to ask questions through chat or whatever. And I think Thanos will put those in, and it just helps me to get feedback and questions from people. So don't hesitate to ask questions as we go through this. Okay, so part one of the presentation is I just want to briefly start out by talking about the link between functional assessment and the development of positive behavior support strategies for adults with disabilities. So obviously these two things are linked closely. And the three basic assumptions of ABA and positive behavior supports is that first, all behavior is learned or is a physiological response. So most behavior is learned, and we want to influence how people learn and what they learn. And behavior can be changed by altering antecedents and or consequences. And there's factors in the environment, the work setting, the home setting, the community setting that can be changed to increase and maintain specific behaviors or to decrease specific behaviors. So often we don't look at the environment and how that needs to be changed as much as we should. And a lot of the focus in developing appropriate positive behavior supports needs to focus on the environment and changing the environment rather than just looking at the individual and think, oh, we need to change what Keith does because Keith has challenging behaviors. But it's like, well, that's important, but if you really look broadly at the situation, your focus is going to change more on changing the environment as well as changing specific behaviors for the individual. Okay, so you need to look at the changing the undesirable behaviors and improving behavior. So you need to look at, the job coach behavior, residential staff, uh, as well as the specific behavior for the individual. And then the overall purpose of positive behavior supports is create environments that are conducive to increasing positive and desirable behaviors. So again, you're looking at the environment and what needs to happen in the environment as much or even more than what needs to happen for the individual with a disability. Okay, and then determining the function of an undesirable behavior is critically important. For anything that you're going to do, and understanding the function of the behavior is the key to effective positive behavior support. So if you don't understand what the function is, or you're not basing your intervention upon the function of behavior, you're just kind of doing a hit and miss approach, and you may have a 50% chance of being successful or even less. But if you understand the function and your intervention is based upon what the reason is why the person's engaging in the challenging behavior, then you're more likely to go down the road of developing effective interventions that are going to actually work. Okay, so functional assessment then should lead to a focus on preventing undesirable behaviors from occurring rather than waiting for the behavior to occur and then punishing it. So often we just kind of don't focus enough on preventing the undesirable behavior or the challenging behavior from occurring. So when you're doing functional assessment, you're trying to determine why the person is doing the behavior, what the function is, that should lead you to how do we prevent the behavior from occurring? Okay, so then the focus is on replacing disruptive behavior with appropriate behaviors that serve the same function. And you notice I'm using different terms here, disruptive, challenging, undesirable. But what we're really talking about is behavior that is not appropriate for that setting based upon the people in the setting without a disability. So in classrooms, it's the teacher. In the job site, it's the job coach, the employer, co-workers, or so on. So it's kind of their perspective that we need to take most account of. But it's replacing the disruptive behavior with appropriate behaviors that serve the same function. So if Keith is engaging in behaviors to get attention, such as hitting a staff person to get attention, then the focus needs to be on teaching Keith an appropriate way to get attention from the staff person without having to engage in aggressive behaviors. And the two major functions behaviors serve are first to obtain or get something desirable, or B, to escape or avoid something undesirable. And how they play out is going to vary from person to person and situation to situation. And sometimes the person will do a behavior to get something, and sometimes they will do the exact same behavior to avoid something. So it's not the topography of the behavior that's important, it's the function. Okay, and then you can do a complete functional analysis through interviews, direct observation, and systematic manipulations. So again, you start with the interview, then you do direct observations, and then if necessary, you go into systematic manipulations. But what I found in my work in my career is generally the interview and direct observations will lead you to understanding what the function of the behavior is. Okay, and then there's specific values of functional analysis and functional assessment. And the first, the person's behavior is reasonable from that person's perspective. It may seem bizarre to us. It may seem very inappropriate. I once saw a man put his head through a window. It was very upsetting, very disturbing. But from his perspective, there was a reason why he was doing it. Okay, and we need to understand that perspective. And then people with disabilities not engage in problem behaviors because they have a disability label such as autism or Down syndrome or learning disability or whatever. And then again, there's a logic to people's behavior, and functional assessment is an attempt to understand that logic. Okay, so part two is what components of positive behavior support should be put in place for successful interventions in complex community environments. And I'm really wanting to focus on people being in the community rather than residential. Well, residential settings are part of it, but not more restrictive settings like institutions or sheltered workshops or so on. Okay, so the first thing is you need a written behavior support plan. It's not necessary for minor behavioral issues, but if the person is doing something more challenging, more intense, then you need to have a written plan. Okay, and it also provides a clear strategy for monitoring progress or lack of. Sometimes what we do doesn't work, and we just need to acknowledge that and accept it and not take it personally. But you make your best effort, what you think is a reasonable intervention, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, you change what you're doing. But you need to be uh, monitoring progress, so you need to be doing some data collection on what's uh, necessary and what's working. Okay, and effective written plan provides a format for modifying support procedures in response to ongoing changes in the behavior of the person of interest and the context in which that behavior occurs. So the context or the environment often changes when people are out in the community. So for instance, at a job site, job task requirements may change. It may be a really busy day. It may be a slow day. It may be raining. It may be a nice day out. All these things are going to change or have an impact upon the person's behavioral challenges. So we need to understand the context and what's going on there. Okay, so why take the time to write a behavior support plan? Well, they're a professional document, and they're part of the legal system and professional standards for quality. So the BACB or whatever the thing is now for the UK or around different places in the world are, they have professional standards that you need to meet. Okay, and you need a format for clearly defining exactly what we've done, reduce problem behaviors, increase positive behaviors. So staff need to understand this. And if you've got different staff working with the person, then they need to be able to read the behavior support plan and know what to do. And it also provides a guide for training all individuals responsible for its implementation. This is something that often gets overlooked. It's like, here's the support plan, read it and go do it. But you need to train the staff to an appropriate level of competence so that they can implement the behavior support plan. So you just can't give them the plan and expect them to do it. Okay, and then you need to identify potential interventions.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would
Yeah.
you have any recommendations in terms of that? Because that's a very valid point you raised. So in terms of how to train staff on behavior support plan?
I'm going to get into that later.
Okay,
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So we'll touch upon that. Okay, so you need to identify potential interventions, and you need to cover all facets of the situation that need to be considered. So you need to look broadly, and this is kind of what I'm wanting to get at as we walk through what are potential interventions. And often we have our bag of tricks. It's like, oh, I'm going to do a DRO reinforcement procedure or whatever, and that can be very appropriate, but you need to really stop and think when you're developing your support plan. It's like, well, what do I need to do comprehensively to change the environment, change the behavior of the person, change the behavior of the staff, and so on. So if you look broadly at these things, you're going to be more successful, I think. Okay, so it's better start globally or bigger macro and then move to more narrow focus, smaller micro, than to narrow the focus, go from a narrow focus to a global focus is usually what we do. So what I mean by this is that you want to think globally about quality of life, and we'll get into quality of life here in a minute, but it's like, what are the big issues that this individual is dealing with? Is it around appropriate job supports, a nice place to live, social interactions in the community, getting out more? So if you start thinking about these big things, and it's like, okay, well, Keith, is doing okay at his job site, but he's having some behavioral issues. So we need to, focus on specific antecedents that are occurring right before the challenging behavior. So that's going from big to small. So I think that's a good way to start things. Um, and both macro and micro are necessary, but it's the global view that drives the specifics of the narrow focus. I hope that makes sense. So if it doesn't, this is a good time to ask a question or whatever. Okay, so
Well,
how do you start?
just to deliver the keywords, since so that we can also give people time to think about a potential question. The first keyword for your CEU is going to be environment. Folks, I repeat, the first keyword for your CEU is environment.
Okay, that's a good
Thank you, Kate.
keyword. I like that one. Okay, so how do you start globally? The first thing is quality of life, and I can't emphasize this enough because we don't look at, does the individual have a good quality of life? The quality of life is a difficult concept to come up with specific measures. So I like this article by David Phelps defining and applying the concept of quality of life. And I'm going to walk through some components that Phelps has come up with. And I found this really helpful over the years in working with staff because it gives a specific way to analyze an individual's quality of life. So let's jump right into it here. So Phelps has 6 components, and the first one is physical well-being. And this involves health, nutrition, fitness, mobility, and personal safety. So when you're thinking about what needs to happen for this individual from a physical well-being perspective, here are 3 specific things that you can look at. So you can say, oh, how's Keith's health? How's Keith's nutrition? How's Keith's fitness? How's Keith's mobility? How's Keith's personal safety? So it just then gets you to focus on these quality of life aspects. And now you think, okay, well, if we're going to develop a positive behavior support plan for Keith, we need to look at his physical well-being, of course, and his quality of life around this. And if it's not good, then we can focus on these areas and come up with interventions that are specific to increase in quality of life in these areas. And often these are macro or broad areas that we're looking at. Okay. So that's the first one. The second was material well-being. And here Phelps breaks it down into wealth, ownership, housing quality, and transportation. So again, you're looking at material well-being. So looking at wealth ownership, so income. So does Keith have a good job where he's making a decent income? If not, then we need to change either the job or the employment situation or ask for a higher wage or whatever the case might be. on housing quality, privacy, possessions, meals, neighborhood situation, and so on. So again, this is giving you specific components to focus in on as far as the intervention goes. And you may be thinking, well, how does this deal with positive behavior supports and challenging behavior? And I think that's a good question to ask because it's obviously a critical one. And then it forces you to focus on, well, material well-being. So, okay, meals and food. So if Keith is not having good food to eat or is eating poorly, then that may be influencing his challenging behavior because his sugar intake is too high, which leads to he's becoming hyper, and then he has a sugar crash at the end and becomes aggressive and so on. So we need to change Keith's food around. So again, it's helping you focus interventions that are going to be effective on both a micro and macro level. Okay, social well-being. I really want to emphasize that social well-being, I think, is probably the critical issues that we need to focus in on for positive behavior support interventions. So here Phelps breaks it down to interpersonal relationships and community involvement. I think both of these are really critical. So interpersonal relationships, of course, involves interactions with other people. And I'm going to talk more about this later on in the presentation. But often the interpersonal relationships a lot of adults with disabilities have are only with staff people who are paid to provide support or other people with disabilities. And that's too narrow of a focus. So we need to look at interpersonal relationships with the community members around that person, job sites, clubs, social interaction opportunities, and so on. And then the community involvement. So activities and events are really an important thing to focus in on. So what activities does the individual have in the community? What events do they go to? And are they going to these community events with people who are not paid to provide support to them? So friends, community members. So Steve Newton and Rob Horner and Craig Kennedy have done a lot of work on how to track people in residential settings, their community involvement level. So that's an example of coming up with specific dependent variables that you can measure success in this area. So from an ABA perspective, we always want to be able to have appropriate data collection procedure. So just the number of activities per week that the person does in the community with people who are not paid to provide support to them can be a very effective measurement system. And then social status and social roles are also important to consider because a lot of people with learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities have poor social status in that they're looked down upon by the general public and seen as lesser or not as important people as non-disabled people. So we need to look at social status, and that often ties into the person's employment situation. So again, it's just getting you to think broadly about these issues. And then Phelps has productive well-being, so personal development, choice and control, and constructive activity. So personal development, competence, and independence. So from a ABA perspective, can we do systematic instruction procedures to develop competence and independence for individuals in whatever situation they are involved in? So again, it's taking the quality of life issue and then looking down at micro analysis. And emotional well-being. I think since the pandemic hit, what I'm seeing and hearing is that emotional and mental health issues are becoming more and more of a problem for individuals with disabilities as well as the rest of us as well. So we don't want to not consider emotional well-being, even though as behavior analysts, we don't necessarily think as emotions being important as the people's behavior, but they reflect upon the person's mental health status. And that's something that we really need to be considering in our developing interventions. And then civic well-being. So we want people with disabilities to be part of their civic or community that they are living in. So it's an important component, and often services are driven by political issues such as funding or what's considered an appropriate service. And so we want people with disabilities to be involved in their communities politically as well as socially. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is just a form I came up with to help analyzing quality of life issues. So at the top there is Fels's 6 quality of life issues. And then on the left is positive outlook for the future and negative outlook for the future. So I've worked with students when I was a university professor who were getting their teaching credential or other certification. And they just found this really helpful to sit down and come up with a quick analysis of what is good and what's not good in the person's life. So if you email me, I can send you this form, and I also have the form filled in with the subcategories as well. So I just found this to be a helpful way to analyze things. I find it easier if I have a visual component to analyze. It just helps me think through things easier. Okay, and then we look at quality of life. There's a documentary, And Then Came John, that I really like. It's old, from 1989, but John was a man with Down syndrome, and it just shows his life, and he has a great quality of life. So it's just very inspirational. He's very involved with the community, has a lot of friends, does all these things in the community with different people and so on. So it's a nice video to watch or show to people with disabilities, family members, and so on, that people with disabilities can have an excellent quality of life. Okay, and now I want to talk about some variables to consider for identifying potential interventions. And this is based upon a book that we did on functional assessment and program development. So I just want to be upfront that this is where I'm coming from. So I'm going to walk you through this. And again, this is a visual that we came up with to help you understand how to look at potential interventions. Because again, we often think too narrowly about interventions, and I want to get you looking broadly at this. So person-centered planning. This is kind of the place to start. If you're not doing person-centered planning, I encourage you to look at the research on this. Carolyn Hughes, Craig Miner, Paul Bates have done some excellent research on person-centered planning. So it's just, what are the person's goals, strengths, barriers, and so on. But what does the person want? So it's their life. We need to be focusing on what they want and how we help develop supports so they have a good life. So you need to define the problem behavior. And I want to put a plug in for developing operational definitions of behavior. I think this is one thing that we often overlook. And in your operational definitions, you want to have positive exemplars what the behavior is and negative exemplars what the behavior is not, and have this written out for staff on their data collection device, the paper or whatever, so that they can refer to it rather than just saying, oh, track Keith's aggression. You have an operational definition of what aggression is and is not with examples. So for instance, is a verbal threat aggression? Is swinging at somebody but missing them aggression? Is actual contact aggression? So you just want to have those components in your operational definition. Okay, and then you want to identify what the function of the behavior is. Again, this is the key issue. So you see things are going in and then coming out from what the function of the behavior is. And then looking at physical, medical, psychological, mental health assessments and issues for the individual. So again, looking broadly at what's going on in the person's life. And foundational and lifestyle strategies. So communication ability, mobility, things like that. So you're looking at what's the person's lifestyle like. And sometimes people have great lifestyles, sometimes people have bad or poor lifestyles, and you want to change their lifestyle so that it's good and meets their requirements. Okay, and then setting event and predictor strategies. So as ABA, BCBAs, or whatever role you're in, you want to be able to identify setting events and predictor uh, things that are going to influence the behavior for better or for worse. Now, if you know the setting event, then again, on an antecedent basis, you can change setting events to keep the behavior from occurring, and then you don't have to deal with it. And then teaching strategies. So as ABA people, we need to be able to systematically instruct people so that they learn appropriate skills. So teaching strategy is really important, and we'll get into that a little bit here. And then consequence strategies. So you need to have positive reinforcement strategies, punishment strategies, though they can be appropriate, obviously, to don't want to be doing aversive things that hurt people or so on. But there is a role for punishment in interventions, but we want to make the consequences as positive as we can for the individual. So I always say, keep things positive for people. Okay, and then effective positive behavior support plan will be proactive, so it's focused on keeping the behavior from occurring. It's educative, it's teaching skills to the person. It's functional, it's based upon skills that are meaningful to the person. It's individualized, it's based upon that individual and their settings. And it's an informative so that it tells people who are involved as well as the person themselves what needs to happen. Okay, and then it's important to remember that you are what you measure. So what I mean by this is when you're developing your intervention plan or your intervention, if you measure the number of times Keith is aggressive, and that can be an important thing to measure, then your intervention is more likely to be focused on decreasing physical aggression, which again can be important. But if you're measuring Keith's appropriate interactions with people in the community, then that is going to change your focus a little bit more on positive behaviors to teach that are meeting the same function, but make it so the person doesn't have to engage in the negative behaviors. So you just want to keep that in mind, that you are what you measure. Okay, part 3. So complexity of developing and implementing successful interventions in applied settings involving staff with a variety of skill levels.
Keith,
So
we
staff
had,
support issues. So you
sorry,
talked about,
sorry,
brought this up
sorry to
earlier. Okay,
interrupt
go
you, but
ahead.
um, we had a question, and I just thought I would wait for you to complete the analysis of your section before I asked
Okay,
about it.
okay.
Which model do you use? Is it Lavinia?
Which model?
Do you use? Is it based on Gary Lavinia's work?
Oh,
I
Gary
sub
Levine's work?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is to a certain degree based upon Gary Levine's work. Um, I went to a presentation he did many years ago, and it was very impressive. But he was focused on functions of behavior at that point in time. So I have to admit I haven't read his work recently. So yes, and I'm not sure is my answer, I guess. Okay. Okay.
Okay, okay.
So I hope that answers your question. If not, ask it in a different way. Okay, so staff support issues. So in-service training is not enough. And good ideas are invariably constrained by the parts and skills that surround them. So Steve Johnson's book, Where Good Ideas Come From, which I highly recommend. Anyway, so let's get into staff issues. So I would pronounce this person's name if I could, but I can't, so I don't want to mangle it too much. But I went to a presentation that he did on why don't our staff just do what we tell them, and I was very impressed by it. So I just want to walk briefly through the components that he put out there. So first one is equipment, and this he wasn't focused necessarily on people with disabilities or ABA focus on that. It was more ABA generic. So equipment, he had the example of people in restaurants weren't wearing their gloves. And when they analyzed why not, it was though their gloves that they had were covered with grease and so on, and they didn't like to wear them. They were not able to use the gloves appropriately because they had so much junk on them. So it's just you need to change the gloves frequently and make sure people have clean gloves every day. So equipment in ABA setting might be a data collection device. So if you're using Central Reach or another system, do they have, a smartphone or smart device where they can easily collect data, and have they been trained on how to use that equipment? So first thing to think about. Second thing is goals and objectives. So what are the goals for the staff, but also what are the goals and objectives for the individuals that they're working with? Do they understand those goals and objectives? And understand how their role plays out in the person meeting the goals and objectives from their person-centered plan. And then skill level. People are at different skill levels. When you enter the field, your skill level may not be great, but as you get more experience, your skill level is going to increase. And so you need to look at skill level, and if person needs skills, then what skills do they need to learn? So from a staff perspective, what skills do you need to teach staff so that they can then teach skills to the individual with a disability? And supervision. So this was brought up earlier. So people need supervision, appropriate supervision. I know in my career, I've sometimes had great supervisors and other times not so great supervisors who were not there and so on. So people need supervision, and they need the supervisor to be there on an appropriate basis so that the supervisor can provide interventions and skill building things for that person. And then the process disconnect. So often what happens is that there's a disconnect between what's happening on a reality basis and what we want to be happening. So for instance, in a residential setting, we want individuals to be learning how to, for instance, cook food and prepare meals. But the process disconnect may be that it's easier for staff to just cook the food themselves rather than taking the time to teach the individual how to cook it. So then you get that disconnect between what needs to be happening and what is easier or is actually happening in the situation. And then feedback, which ties closely into supervision. People need feedback on performance that is not good or not well done, but also feedback on when they're doing well. So when I was supervising direct service staff as a BCBA for an ABA agency, I really tried to focus on giving as much positive feedback as I could, because often they're dealing with individuals who have really serious, challenging behaviors, and it's stressful, and they are not necessarily sure, is the situation improving? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And so on. So I really tried to make sure they got as much feedback as I could give them, both positive and, if necessary, then corrective feedback. And then reinforcement. Staff need reinforcement. Often they're not paid well, they're not getting good benefits. So that verbal reinforcement or just taking them out for some coffee or tea or something can be really powerful. And then also asking them what sort of reinforcement they want. And then discipline or punishment. So, we need to do this sometimes as supervisors, and it can be a painful process for everybody involved, but it needs to occur. You just can't let a situation that's not good keep going on. So I found those to be really helpful components for analysis. Okay, so part 4 here, I want to get into what works and what doesn't work. And I'm going to go through this a little quick. Oh, go ahead, Thanos.
Sorry. I've got a question, and I also need to deliver a keyword. But first, let me ask you the question. Would the periodic service review be a good way of, be a good framework for evaluating the effectiveness of services? And where would that come into place in a PBS framework?
Yeah, I think excellent question. I think that is a very good way to do things. What you want to think about is how frequently that needs to occur. So, if you have a new staff person, oh, we have a 6-month review and a yearly review, that's not frequent enough. So especially for a new staff person, we need to make sure that there's reviews, the first week, the second week, third week, and then maybe every other week after that. So that they're getting feedback and they have opportunity to ask questions and talk through things and so on. So yes, that can be a good way to give feedback to people.
Brilliant, thank you. And let me just deliver the second keyword, folks, for your CU. The second keyword is process. The second keyword is process. All right, thanks, Kip.
Okay, sure. Okay, so what doesn't work is the flow-through model, and this may be different in different countries or different settings, but here in the States, often we think the person needs to start a day activity center, then go to a work activity center, and then to a regular program center, and then finally to support unemployment. And what the research indicates that it doesn't work, that if a person starts out in a segregated setting, they're likely to stay in that segregated setting. So I've been a critic of segregated settings such as institutions and sheltered workshops, day programs, adult day programs, and so on. So that doesn't work, flow through model. Putting people into slots doesn't work. So this is, oh, I've got a job site here, got an opening, I'm going to put Keith into it. Keith may not like that job. He may not like the people there and so on. It's not a good match. It's not as part of person-centered planning. So putting people into slots doesn't work. Physical presence only. So we want integration and inclusion in the community. And sometimes we think, oh, Keith is in the community, so things are going well. But physical presence only doesn't work. We need to look more broadly at it. And physical presence only is here in the States is what I call mall therapy or van therapy, where people go to the mall and they spend the day walking around, or they go in a van to a park or someplace and they kind of hang out. So they're physically present, but they're not part of the community. Okay, so what works? So this is obviously the most important part of my presentation. And my caveat is that there's no silver bullet. It's not that you do one thing and you fix a situation and the person suddenly has a great quality of life. But if you do these things and they're presented in no particular order, but I don't know if you can read this, it says, Carl, that's a mighty big if. So it is a big if, but you want to put these components in place that are appropriate for the person. Okay, so first, where one lives, works, and recreates matters greatly. So the person has to be in a meaningful environment that leads to a quality of life outcome. And some situations, such as shelter workshops, are incapable of providing quality of life outcomes for people with disabilities. So you just need to admit that if you're in one of those segregated situations and think about broader systematic change. And I've got some references here at the end, how you can look at those broader changes. Okay, systematic construction of functional skills is really important. So as ABA providers or whatever role we're in, need to be able to teach skills using task analysis, prompting, error correction strategies, etc. So you need to have good instructional skills to actually teach skills to the individual. Self-determination. We want people to be self-determined. Again, it's their life. We want to understand what they want their life to be and help them achieve that quality of life, those outcomes. But people need meaningful choices. So it's not, do you want French fries or mashed potatoes to eat? That's not a meaningful choice. It's like, do you want the day program or do you want the sheltered workshops? Those are not meaningful choices. So people need to have meaningful choices so they can achieve the quality of life outcome that they want. Okay, here's another cartoon. Okay, sir, would you like Inferno or non-Inferno? Ha, just kidding. It's all Inferno, of course. I just get a kick out of asking that. So that's my attempt at humor here for the gates of hell. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of adults with disabilities, it's always inferno for them. Okay, back to what works. Self-advocacy. We want people to be self-advocates, and we need to teach self-advocacy skills to them so they can be self-advocacy. It's not like, hey, Keith, go out there and be a self-advocate. It's how you teach self-advocacy skills to people. And there are some excellent curricula out there on teaching self-advocacy and teaching social skills. So social skills can be a critical, important component in a person's quality of life. If you have good social skills and people like you, you're more likely to be successful on your job site. There's a lot of research indicating that social skills are the key thing for being successful on job sites. You're going to be more successful in being involved in the community because people like you and want to hang out with you and so on. So if a person doesn't have good social skills, you really want to focus on teaching social skills. And self-management strategies. I'm a big fan of self-management strategies, and I list them here for you. And the advantage of self-management strategies is that then the individual doesn't have to be reliant upon staff members telling them what to do. So if I have self-management strategies, then I'm more independent and I can do more things by myself. Flexibility. What I mean by this is that nothing works all the time, and we need to be flexible in thinking about our interventions. And also, once the intervention starts, things change, and we need to be flexible in changing our interventions as well. And then social inclusion in the community. So there's 4 components of social inclusion. There's physical integration, which we just talked about. There's social interactions, you know, saying hi to the clerk saying hi, how's your day? Not that they care, but they ask. So those social interactions can then lead to social relationships and social networks. And social relationships and social networks are the most important things to think about for people. And social relationships or social interactions that are meaningful that you have with people, and social networks are people who are really, really important to you. And that when you have stress or joy in your life, you turn to those people. So if you have good social relationships and good social networks, then your need to engage in challenging or inappropriate behaviors is decreased. And when things go wrong in your life, you have people to turn to, and since you have people to turn to, things are less likely to go wrong in your life. So I hope this makes sense, because this is something really important to think about. So is your intervention leading to social relationships and social networks for the individual? And these relationships or networks are not involving people who are paid to provide support to them. And contextual fit. So what is challenging behavior in one setting may be a positive behavior in another. So I have Dale DeLeo's book in the reference section at the end here, but he provides an example of working with an adult who engaged in challenging behaviors of spitting and cursing, which was inappropriate in most settings. But what they did was got him a job at the loading dock, where everybody was cursing and spitting. So there it was appropriate, and it was a positive behavior or positive behaviors. And you also need to think about what can the setting tolerate. So there are some employment settings, for example, that tolerate nothing. You know, it's like you do something wrong, you're out the door. While other settings, you know, they talk, you know, it's more laid back, more thing, and a lot of things they can tolerate, especially if there's not a lot of social interactions with customers. So if you have somebody in, say, a retail store where they're interacting a lot with customers, then, you know, they can't engage in challenging behaviors towards the customer. But if they're just having coworkers who are joking around and so on, then that situation can tolerate more challenging behavior. So you need to think about, well, where would I want to put that person? A relaxation training. So often people with disabilities get stressed. We all do, and relaxation training can be a good way to help person cope with difficult situations. and anger control training. So Arnold Goldstein and others have worked on this a lot. And so it's aggressive replacement training and anger control training. And I just think this is a good strategy to use, especially for people who don't have learning disability, but may have mental health issues or emotional disabilities, as we call it here in the States. So just want to throw this strategy out there for you. And collaboration. So you don't have to know everything, but you need to know people. So the more connections you have, the better off you're going to be. And if you want to build comprehensive services, it's okay to reach out to other people like mental health providers, medical providers, and so on, so that you can really build those comprehensive services. And non-contingent reinforcement. Often as behavior analysts, we're setting up contingency-based reinforcement systems, which it can be a very appropriate way. But I've seen more and more research emerging on non-contingent reinforcement, and I think this is a very powerful strategy that we really need to do more research on and look more closely at. So consider non-contingent reinforcement in your interventions. And neurodiversity. So here in the States, neurodiversity is coming more and more into play, and it goes under different names. What I mean by this is that we want to respect who that person is and that they have neurodiversity or other types of diversity in their life. And our role is not to change who they are as a person. It's to develop positive behavior supports and teach skills and so on. But we need to respect that person's choice and who they want to be. So this really brings up a lot of complex issues around positive behavior supports. And I think ABA has gotten a bad rap from people who are neurodiverse. Sometimes it's well-deserved and sometimes it's not. But I think ABA people have not always respected the people that we work with in the way that we should. So something to think about. Diet. Diet can play an important issue in challenging behaviors, and it's something that you really want to consider for the person. And exercise level. Exercise level can help us all lead healthier lifestyles, but also if you're getting appropriate amount of exercise, then you may reduce your challenge behaviors. And there's been some research on this that shows that running and lifting weights and other things can lead to decrease in challenging behaviors for some people. And then participation in integrated settings outside of work as well as at work. So we want people to be integrated at work settings and also in their community. So are they involved in clubs, groups, organizations? And these don't have to be disability related clubs. They can be around sports. They can be around politics. They can be around cultural issues, arts, whatever the case might be. But you need to get people involved, and this can have an impact on positive behavior supports for the better. Okay, 3 excellent books on quality improvement in human services that I want to get you to consider looking at. And again, looking broadly at positive behavior supports involves systematic look at the systems that we have in place. So Thomas Gilbert's book, Human Competence, it's not focused on disability issues, but it's an excellent way on how to analyze what's going on. Joyce Alban's book, Quality Improvement in Employment and Other Human Services, is an excellent book. It is focused on supported employment, but what Joyce does in the book is gives you specific things to do on how to analyze what is the problem is and then how to improve or fix the problem. So I used this book when I taught an advanced course on transition and employment services, and students really found it helpful in analyzing problems that they were dealing with. And then Dale DeLeo's book, Raymond's Room, Ending the Segregation of People with Disabilities. I wish this book had been there when I first started my career, because it really helps you understand the system that disability is involved in and that people with disabilities are caught up in, and how it works or doesn't work. So I recommend these 3 books. And one thing that Dale DeLeo does in his book is he talks about the disability industrial complex and its refusal to change or be open to new ideas, the exploitation of people with disabilities, how it's set up on type of or severity of disability rather than support needs, how it has low expectations, and it groups people with a similar disability. So it's just a good way to analyze what may be going on structurally with people you're working with. And then what's the ultimate goal of positive behavior supports for adults with a disability? So I like this quote from Helen Keller. This is a paraphrase. People with disabilities not only need to be given lives, they need to be given lives worth living. And I think if people that we work with have lives worth living, then that's going to have a positive impact upon their challenging behavior and positive behavior support needs that they have. So something to think about. And a warning here, 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion. So I have a functional assessment book, a book on positive behavior supports for adults with disabilities in employment, community, and residential settings, case studies and applied behavior analysis for individuals with disabilities, systematic instruction of functional skills for students and adults with disabilities. And then if you want to connect with me, I have an Amazon author page. I'm Academia, ResearchGate, Google Play, Goodreads, Instagram, Facebook, and my YouTube channel where I have videos. If you just search Keith's story, you can find that. So anyway, thank you. So questions, comments, clarifications?
Thank you, Keith. That was fantastic. And I can see that people were really engaging in discussions in the chat. Just to say that we also use some of these books ourselves. For example, the case study one is a go-to option when we want to do some nice activities during lectures. So thank you for making our life easier as instructors, Keith.
Oh, good, thanks.
In that sense. People are asking about the slides. If Keith is happy to share the slides with me, I can send them with your certificates. So I'm happy to do so. I've done it in the past. And I can turn them into a PDF for you, Keith, if that helps.
Yeah.
So that way it's easier to share with people.
Yeah, it's out there for the public. So however, I just want to help people. So use it the best
Cool.
you can.
Let me deliver the last keyword. And then folks, please fire your questions in the chat and I'm happy to read them to Keith. So the last keyword is flexibility for your CU. The third and last keyword is flexibility. I've not yet shared the link where you're gonna submit your keywords. Bear with. I just want to make sure I read the questions first. I've got a lot of people saying thank you and brilliant and that they loved the presentation, Keith, and that your points were really helpful. The last word, I'll say it one more time, is flexibility. The last word for the CEU is flexibility. I've got a question, Keith, that at some point you mentioned the use of punishment, and could you clarify what you meant by this?
Could you read that again, please?
At some point you mentioned punishment, and if you could elaborate and clarify what you meant.
Sure. So punishment, type 1 punishment is a presentation of a stimulus or event following a behavior that results in a decrease in the behavior. So people, punishment can be an appropriate intervention, and you need to consider punishment procedures. But I don't mean aversive punishment procedures. Providing feedback to a person like, please don't hit people. We like it when you're nice to people. When you run out into the street, that's a dangerous thing and you should not do that. So things like that, or if you have a token economy system set up for an individual and you add in a response cost system, that's a punishment procedure, but it can be very appropriate. So, there is a role for punishment in positive behavior supports, but it needs to be minimal and we need to focus on positive behavior. So we want to focus on things that the person likes and that build skills and so on. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Sorry, I'm just looking through the chat. Folks, I've added a form for you to provide us with feedback, and I've added you to, and I've added in the chat the CEU form. So make sure you click on these links before I conclude the session, because you won't have access to the chat afterwards. So just make sure they are sitting in your browser so you can access them later on if needed. Have I got any other questions? Keith, do you accept part-time remote supervision for master students with a focus on adult services? I've got a question. Whether
I don't do.
Are you available to supervise folks remotely?
I don't do that. I might be open to it. You can email me. But a person I would recommend is Lisa Britton, Brittan. So if you look her up, I know she does remote supervision.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. I don't see any other questions. People are thanking us. I'm glad you enjoyed it, folks. Keith, thank you ever so much for
Thank
presenting
you.
for us. And folks,